afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Lung Cancer Updates in 2025. This is important information from everyone, and Katie is presenting today from our nutrition series. So we're very grateful to have you all with us today, and the topic is kitchen toxins, reducing everyday chemical exposure. At the Lung Cancer Institute, we truly believe that nutrition is the basis of healthy living, both for our patients and survivors, as well as prevention for all of us. But Katie's topic today is taking us even a step further and in a little bit different direction. So this truly is a topic that we're all interested in. So thank you very much, Katie, for thinking of this and for educating us. For our audience, in the interest of time, Katie's bio was sent to you by email, and we invite you during her presentation to take notes, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat box or the Q&A box, and she will have time at the end of the presentation to answer all your questions. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Katie, and we're anxious for you to get started.
Thank you, Jan, for the introduction as always. Everyone, I'm Katie. I'm a clinical dietitian here at Lung Cancer Institute. I'm excited to talk about these kitchen toxins today, or chemicals that we're exposed to in the cooking process, because as dietitians, we talk a lot about foods that are going to help reduce our risk of cancer or chronic disease. And we also talk a lot about foods that we need to avoid or minimize to reduce our risk of chronic disease, including cancer. But we don't really get into the nitty-gritty of all the other toxins and chemicals that we're exposed to, whether it's the food preparation process, the cooking process, the storage process, things that we're using in our kitchen, that actually could also be increasing our risk of certain diseases or exposure to chemicals that we want to minimize. So it's a fun way to kind of talk about that today in a big setting. And this is also a topic that there's research ever going on it. So we're always learning more and more about the chemicals in our environment, how they're affecting our bodies, and how they're affecting our risk of disease. So we don't have all the information, but it's good to get exposed to the information that we do currently have and know how to address it from there, or how to minimize our risk from there. So with that being said, I will show you the topics that we're going to kind of dig into. So we're going to look at our cookware surfaces. So especially some of these non-stick coatings aren't necessarily the best for us. So we're going to look at some of those, particularly our pans and baking pans. Food storage containers, we'll look at some of these things. This is also a place where toxins can hide, especially in our plastics or can linings. Cutting boards and utensils that we use are also a mode of potential toxin introduction, depending on which ones we're using. Water is actually a huge source of exposure to different toxins and heavy metals. We don't think about it a lot, but it is actually a huge source of exposure for certain things, especially the PFAS. And then cooking methods. There are some cooking methods that could introduce toxic chemicals or compounds that we want to try not to do as much. So we'll talk about all those things and see what we can cover in the short time that we have. So this is kind of a broad table of some of the compounds that we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the PFAS, the part and polyfluoroalkyl substances. PFAS are kind of a newer chemical that we're looking at. They're known as a forever chemical. They can have a lot of potential health concerns associated with them. So they're linked to cancer, immune system disruption, thyroid issues, reproductive issues. So it really interacts with a lot of our hormones. And we know that they're in our body, but we don't really know to what degree they're actually affecting our health. But we have, again, links or associations to a lot of these different health concerns. And BPA is another one that maybe more people know about this one. It's a plastic that is talked about more with those plastic water bottles. You might see things labeled BPA free. And this is another one we want to try to avoid. It's another hormone mimicking plastic substance that is linked to different cancers. It's linked to some of those hormonal kind of cancers, the breast, the prostate, links with obesity and insulin resistance here as well. Again, those hormone pathways, it seems to interact with those. So we want to look at that stuff. The two that I won't talk about as in depth are going to be the sterines and the phytates. Those ones are I'm not going to talk about as much. We just don't simply have the time. But these ones are also things we want to look at as well. So styrofoam, I think most people know styrofoam's not great for the environment, and it's also not great for us to consume. The big source here that I think about is those takeout containers and sometimes those disposable coffee cups. Anytime you're putting anything warm or oily in one of these containers, you're leaching those chemicals into your food. Especially the heat does that. So we never want to heat up anything in those containers. So just keep in mind styrofoam, we don't want to heat, and minimize the use of styrofoam as much as possible, because that's going to be one that, again, is going to leach into the food. Styrofoam doesn't really break down easily, so it's not going to break down in the body either. So we want to try to minimize that intake as much as possible. And the styrene was actually one that is listed by the American Institute for Cancer Research, as a group 2 carcinogen. So this just means that we have some evidence that shows it could be causing some cancer. We don't have strong evidence like we do for the category that like cigarettes and alcohol are in, but it's up there. We have some research showing we should probably try to avoid this. And again, it migrates into the food, especially when it's hot or greasy. So those are things to note. I was going to share a video explaining what the PFAS are, and it looks like the link isn't working, but I'll just summarize that the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances are a group of chemical substances that consumers and industrial products have been using and consuming since the 1950s. So it's been around a long time, and they're actually nicknamed forever chemicals because they just simply don't break down. These are things that are often labeled as heat resistance. They're usually labeled as a water resistant coating of some sort. And they don't break down easily in the environment, which also means they don't break down in our body. They're used in things like firefighting foam, batteries, medical equipment, food packaging. There's definitely important uses for these things, but again, we don't want to be consuming them, and we don't want to be exposing ourselves to them more than we have to. So there's a reason why these exist. There are some uses, but let's try to minimize our exposure. So how do we do that? So the main exposure that people get is actually from drinking water. So from our tap water, that is by far the most exposure you're getting to the PFAS, which is kind of crazy. We're getting forever chemicals in our tap water. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that means we really should be trying to filter our water out of these things if we can, or at least our main sources of drinking water. Of course, once in a while, you might be out and about and have to get water from a fountain or a plastic water bottle. Once in a while, it's fine. Let's talk about most exposure that we have to these things. The most consistent exposure is what's important. So filtering our water, especially if it's from a well or a water system. It's in food, so because it's in our water supply, it's found a lot in some of these fish products. So a lot of times it can be higher in the body if we're eating like large amounts of fish. They've also found it in dairy products, livestock, of course, any water source that has PFAS exposure in it. Food packaging. So again, it's going to be anything that's like grease resistant, water resistant, waxy kind of packaging. So a big source of this is also the popcorn bags, the microwavable popcorn bags. So best way to do popcorn is just not in a microwavable bag. You could do stovetop with some oil. That's usually what I recommend for people to do. But yeah, minimize exposure to heating anything in a plastic or like a waxy water resistant plastic paper bag. The household products, of course, it's going to be in anything that's like steam resistant, water repellent. It's in actually a lot of our clothing. It's everywhere. We can't get away from it. And the idea is, and I don't want to, sound kind of like an alarmist. It's not to completely avoid it at all costs. It's just minimize our exposure since it's everywhere in the environment. Okay. Non-stick cookware is another big one. So this is part of that Teflon pan category, Teflon or non-stick pans. Whenever, again, heating that stuff in a pan with your food, that's going to leach those chemicals into your food over time. So we don't want to do that. And again, the health effects that we've found from these things, why we want to reduce exposure, is because of those hormone mimicking effects, some increased risk of starting cancers, immune system dysregulation. And so we want to avoid if we can. And the reason why I put the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency logo on here is because some of this all of this information is actually directly from their website. So I use a lot of the environmental working group information in here because they're a really good evidence-based resource for these toxins. But I also wanted to show that even the US government is saying these things are in our water and they're not great for us. So it's a known thing that people are trying to currently try to mitigate their exposure to. So according to the CDC, nearly all people, so 98% of the people in the US have some amount of PFAS in their blood. So it's very possible that every single person listening to this lecture, including me, has some of these microplastics, forever plastics floating around in our body. There's also been studies showing that we have some microplastics in our brain, in our blood. So we know we're exposed. And again, tap water is a huge source of this, which makes sense why it would be so universal amongst people to have this exposure. 45% of tap water in the US contains one or more type of PFAS. So there's a bunch of different subcategories of the PFAS, but as a branch term, they're called PFAS. So those forever plastics that we get exposed to. So how do they get in the water supply? How do we drink it in our tap water? How's it getting there? It's from all of these different things. It's coming from the industrial processes, the wastewater treatments, landfills, firefighting foam. Think of the California fires and all that stuff that ended up now going into the ocean. It's everywhere. So this is just a little graph depicting how it can be really integrated into the environment. And then the graph on the right is from the Environmental Working Group. This shows in the light blue, it's how much of the drinking water was above the limit for the amount of PFAS that should be in the water. And then the dark blue shows how much of the tap water is below that limit. And the limit that the standards are right now is actually very high. They're looking at readjusting that number to make it lower. And so these numbers on the right side of the graph are what the new proposed limit should be. And it shows that we would have a lot of work to do to get a lot of those chemicals out of the water. So we're exposed to it mostly through water, but also through some of our other cooking methods. And these are ways that we could avoid PFAS. So again, a huge source is Teflon pans or nonstick pans. Please, if you have a pan at home that has like score marks in it, or it looks like it's been used a lot and the coating is starting to come off, if it's a nonstick, that isn't one of these safer options, then we might want to reconsider that, because again, you're leaching into your food every time some of these forever chemicals. So what is the safe thing to cook with? It is going to be cast iron is one of my favorites. So cast iron is one of the safer ones to cook with. Okay, we cannot go wrong with a cast iron. It's heavy, and it's a little bulky to keep in the house, and the cleaning protocol is a little bit different. But cast iron is actually really safe to use. And since we know all of these things kind of leach into our food, what's leaching into your food with the cast iron is actually dietary iron. So people who use cast iron pans for cooking actually have a little bit better iron intake, because they're getting a little bit of the iron in their food from the pan. So that's kind of cool. And another option would be a stainless steel pan. That's a very safe pan to use. And then there's these non-toxic non-stick pans. So some examples are the Green Pan, Caraway, Our Place. These are just some examples. There's a lot of options on the market. The thing to know about these is that they are typically some type of aluminum or stainless steel core. So the main pan itself is made of those metals. And then to make it non-stick, they usually do some type of ceramic coating, which what makes it non-stick without using any of the PFAS or the plastic. So that layer of the ceramic coating is what makes it non-stick. If anyone's ever looked at these pans, you'll know that they're pretty expensive. A lot of times these are more expensive than a non-stick that has the PFAS or the other materials on them. But it could be worth it, right? For the sake of health. And in terms of these options that are listed on the screen, I find the Green Pan to be a little bit more moderate in price. The Caraway is probably the most expensive out of all of these. It has a really nice look to it, but they're all going to be, again, some type of aluminum, stainless steel core with a ceramic coating. And just note that if you do get these, invest in these pans, read the care instructions on there. A lot of these pans do better on like a moderate heat. You don't want to heat them too much, because that can take away the non-stick property to it. So a medium heat is going to be best for these pans. If you want to do a high heat, I would suggest the cast iron. That is going to be a better one to tolerate really high heat with. And just note that using some of these other materials, again, they're all going to leach into our food a little bit. So just be careful with the different types of, read what the pan is made out of, so that way we can see what metals could be leaching into us. We don't really want too much like nickel, chromium to be leaching into our foods. So anytime you cook anything acidic like a pasta sauce, just know that those things are more prone to leaching the chemical into them because it's more acidic. So just things to keep a lookout for. And then water. We know that water is another huge source of the PFAS exposure. So what's the best way to filter our water? The best way is if you can do a reverse osmosis or a granular activated carbon filter. So there are very fancy filters that you can install in your house or under your sink. These are wonderful. If you don't want to invest in something like that, there are more moderate like pitcher options that you can choose from. The Berkey is one that like stands on your counter. The Zero Water, the clearly filtered, and the Epic Water are all those kind of like handheld pitchers that you can put in your fridge and keep cool. The nice thing about all these filters is that they all use some type of activated carbon filter or microfiltration system. Some of them use ion exchange or anion exchange, which is, again, just a really intense filtration system that's going to actually filter out some of these PFAS. Another thing you can look for is the those certifications on the filter. So if you use maybe just your fridge filter per se, you can look at your fridge filter cartridge and see the certifications on it. So I actually did this with my fridge filter, and you'll see these series of numbers on there. So there is the NSF and the ANSI standards, and these different numbers correlate with what they filter out. So again, just as an example, I looked at my fridge filter and it is actually some type of activated carbon filter, which means it's pretty good. It's going to filter out a lot of things. So it not only had the NSF 42, but it also had the 53 certification on there. So that means that it's 42 just means that it's going to take out that chlorine taste or the odor, which is good. But we also want it to remove the other things. So the 53 means that it's removing more of the leads, the arsenic pesticides that are in the water still, and this also removes those PFAS and some of those other plastics in our water, BPA and stuff like that. The NSF 58 applies to a reverse osmosis system. So if you wanted to get into the nitty-gritties of looking at your filters and seeing what it's all filtering out, it's kind of cool. Or you could just purchase one of these easy, pitcher options that are lower cost than a professional water filtration system, and you're going to filter out a lot of your water. Again, we want you to be hydrated, so we don't want to avoid sources of water that aren't filtered. But if we have the option to filter the water at home, especially the one that we're drinking the most of, that's a great thing to do. So now moving on to BPAs. So the BPAs are a plastic that I think people might be more familiar with, and this is a synthetic plastic similar to the PFAS. It's also known as an endocrine disruptor, and it can interfere with hormones, which means that it's been shown to be linked to a bunch of different things with the reproductive system, the immune system, cancer. There's some correlations with asthma and even cognitive behavioral concerns. So it's something that we don't want to expose ourselves more to than we have to. And a lot of the sources of these are going to be those plastic containers that you buy food and beverages in, or that you store food and beverages in. Again, just like the PFAS, heating it is not a good idea. It will leach into foods. When you look at the bottom of plastic, sometimes there's a number on there. So there's a little like recycled triangle and then a number in there. And those are the recycle codes. So this is just to help. This is for helping with the recycling process, but it also can give you an indication as to what type of plastic is used. There's so many different types of plastics out there, which is helpful to create all these different things, but it also can give us an indication of which ones maybe we don't want to be heating our food in or storing our food and drink in. So the recycle codes 3 or 7 can have BPA in them. So just keep that in mind if you see those numbers on a package or a water bottle. That means that there's probably BPA in there, and we might want to avoid it. Canned foods can also be a big source of BPA. The good thing is that there's a lot of canned food now that does avoid BPA, or it will say BPA free. So that's great. But just be careful. Some of the BPA can be in some of the cans. So look for the BPA free if you can, and know that it still could contain some of these things, but we do our best to avoid. The ways that you could avoid the BPAs is by not using plastic at all when possible, especially when storing food at home, cooking at home, all those things. A big one is going to be the plastic wraps. So instead of using plastic wrap to store food or to wrap up our food, there's a lot of other options. So there's these beeswax papers. Those are kind of nice moldable wraps that you could put on top of a bowl, or you could wrap food itself in there, and that's a nice way that you can not be exposing yourself to plastic. And these wash up really nice, and then you can re-wax them as needed. And the wax helps create kind of like a moldable, sticky way to like hold the food together. You can also use like a little string to wrap it up. I think it looks aesthetically pleasing. I think it looks nicer than using a plastic wrap, but it also doesn't have the plastic exposure. There's also little things like food huggers. These also, you could be avoiding those plastic wraps by using these little like silicone containers, and that can help keep some of your cut fruit and vegetables fresher for longer. Or you can put it on a mason jar or some other type of jar to help keep it fresh in the fridge. Cutting boards is a huge one. So think about your cutting boards at home. If you have plastic cutting boards, especially that have a bunch of grooves in them, you could be exposing yourself to plastic every time you cut on them. So every time we cut on the plastic, we're also cutting the plastic, and we're cutting little pieces of plastic into our food. Doesn't really sound appetizing, right? So a way to avoid this is by using those wooden cutting boards, but especially bamboo is a more durable cutting board that we can be using. And you want to use a thicker board for heavier duty things that you're cutting, especially if you're, if you're doing any like raw animal products, make sure that they're used on different cutting boards than fresh produce. I think people used to say use plastic cutting boards for meat products or animal products because it's not going to soak in like it does on the wood. The nice thing about bamboo is that it's a little water resistant, so naturally. So that's a nice thing to be cutting on. I typically try to not cut any raw animal products. I try to just cook them and then cut them afterwards, because whenever we're cooking raw animal products in the kitchen, that really can be spreading bacteria everywhere. So I say my rule of thumb is just throw that raw meat into the oven onto the stove as quick as possible, and then cut and prepare afterwards to minimize the cross contamination. But the bamboo boards wash up really nicely, and then you're not going to be cutting up all that plastic into the food. So another big source of exposure. And then probably one of the more important ones, and the ones that I kind of cringe when I see, is not using plastic to reheat your food. So don't be storing in those plastic Tupperwares if you're going to be reheating. If you're storing it and you're not reheating, it's not as much exposure. But especially if you have, let's say, like a pasta dish that you're going to heat up, it would be very good to heat it up in a glass container instead of heating it up in a plastic container, because again, the oil, the heat, that all leaches into the food. They make a lot of glass containers, tin containers that are nice now. The only little con with this, they're a little bit more annoying to store. They take up more space in your cabinets, but again, they kind of look nicer. It's okay that the top is plastic, because that, when you're heating up, you're not really heating up the lid and exposing the lid. So as long as you're heating up in the glass, that's okay. So those are just my top products or tips for reducing exposure there. And I think what we said before, all of those plastic water bottles, our little plastic Aquafinas or whatever it is, those all are going to be leaching into the water, right, that we drink. So as much as we can, using like a stainless steel or a glass water bottle. They make these nice glass water bottles with like huggies on them, so that way if you drop them, they're not going to shatter. If you can if you're out and getting water, they make boxed water now, which is a little bit better than the plastic water bottles. They still might have some plastic coating on them, but usually it's on the outside, not the inside. So just again, ways to reduce our plastic exposure. It's kind of a fun little side note. Sometimes people will go to get their blood tested to see if they have these toxins in their body. I did have someone once do that test, and they found that they had it was the byproduct of BPA in their blood. And we were going through their things, and we couldn't figure out really where was this plastic exposure coming from. And then the patient told me that they drink out of plastic water bottles all day. They didn't have some type of stainless steel or glass water bottle that they carried around. They just grabbed the plastic water bottles, and it was because it was like a pH or and like an alkaline water that they wanted, and it was coming in these plastic water bottles. And that was the strategy that we used to cut down the BPA that was in the blood, was stopping drinking out of all these plastic water bottles. So it's just things that we don't realize that we're exposed to, but we are. And anyways, putting your water in a safer container is a way to cut down on the exposure to the plastics. Kind of changing gears a little bit, talking more on the actual cooking of food and the exposure to toxins there. I'm sure you're sick of hearing me talk about plastic by now. I did want to just also touch on the way that we cook and how cooking can introduce toxins into the body. So the biggest way that we could probably introduce toxins into the body while cooking is with that really, really high temperature grilling, charring, or frying. Okay, so I love grilling, I love a barbecue, but it is a way that we're exposed to some carcinogenic compounds. So when you grill, especially meat, over that high heat open flame, it can create these carcinogenic compounds, one of them being the heterocyclic amines. So these are produced when the amino acids, or the building blocks of protein in these meats such as beef, pork, and fish, those react to the high heat of the cooking process and turn into this carcinogenic compound. So if possible, there are ways that we can reduce this risk. So one would be to not cook or char things on that open flame. But there's also ways that we can reduce the risk with marinades, and by also cooking some veggies on there as well. Just before I go to the next slide, another way that we can create more toxins with cooking is by frying starchy foods. So French fries is probably like the main example here, but frying at really, really high heats, especially potatoes, they create acrylamides. And especially if the oil hasn't been changed in a while, these are really not good compounds that we're consuming. So if possible, we just want to kind of avoid these foods as to not expose ourselves to those carcinogens. Ways to reduce the toxins while we're cooking would be to flip that meat frequently, or cook the products frequently, or flip them frequently on the grill, cooking on a moderate heat, and then removing any char bites. So when you get those kind of like black parts on the meat, take them off. Those are really like little pockets of carcinogenic compound. So we don't want to eat those. The marinades, such as like herbs, lemon, vinegar, oil, any kind of antioxidant type of vehicle, is going to reduce the carcinogenic effect because it's an antioxidant. So for all, those free radical forming compounds you're eating, you're also getting a lot of antioxidants. So it's a way to kind of minimize that risk. And then, if possible, just baking, steaming, braising, anything at like more moderate temperatures or lower temperatures instead is going to be a safer option. So it's not that you can't grill, it's just try to use marinades, not to really char it. And then the vegetables, when they are on the grill, they don't create that carcinogenic effect because they don't have the proteins like the meat products do. So those are the tips for grilling. Pesticide exposure, I did just want to touch on that. Usually people ask, it's a common question that people will ask, and pesticides can be harmful to health. But I don't want to discourage anyone from eating fruits or vegetables, because fruit and vegetable intake is still going to be extremely important and reduce your risk of cancer and chronic disease. So I don't want to say that we shouldn't eat these things. It's just how we eat them and which ones we eat. So there's the list of the dirty dozen and the clean 15. And essentially what that means is 60% of the clean 15 had absolutely no detectable pesticide residue on them at all. But on the Dirty Dozen, nearly all samples of these foods had pesticide residues on them. If you kind of look at what they are, it might make sense because these are a little bit more finicky produces that might use more pesticides to prevent diseases and to prevent all the bugs and issues that they can have when they're growing them. So the way around this is, if at all possible, the suggestion is to get organic for the Dirty Dozen because they're not going to use the pesticides. There is still pesticide crossover. We can't prevent that from happening in the air. That in the water exposure, that's going to happen, but it's going to be a lot less than the non-organic produce. So if you can get organic for the Dirty Dozen, so maybe you invest in the organic strawberries, but maybe you don't get the organic pineapple because you know that one probably doesn't have much pesticides on it. So that's kind of the trick for that. You don't have to worry about getting organic for the Clean 15, but I would get organic for the Dirty Dozen. And even if you can't get organic for the Dirty Dozen, washing your vegetables and fruits actually reduces significant amount of the pesticides on them. So just make sure you're rinsing them really well. Which does lead me to the next slide, which is about the rinsing and washing of the vegetables. So rinsing with tap water is really one of the best ways. Running tap water, colder tap water, we don't want to use warm because warm can help bacteria grow. So we want to use colder or room temperature water. And the running water helps, the bacteria and the pesticides run off of the fruits and vegetables and down the drain. So that's really the best way. Just rotate it in your hands, rinse it for at least 20 seconds. Another method that some people use that might even be a little bit better at reducing some of the pesticide exposure would be to soak in a baking soda or distilled vinegar, white vinegar. And that one, there's a little recipe for it. You put it in a bowl or a basin, mix it with certain parts baking soda in water or vinegar in water, soaking it. And then again, after that, rinsing in that water again afterwards. No need to buy any special rinses or sprays or putting any detergents or bleaches or anything like that on our fruits and vegetables. That doesn't actually help clean them. The best way is just running tap water. That's the best, safest way. And then again, a baking soda or vinegar is okay, but don't invest in the sprays or any of those things. I don't think it's necessary. And that in a short presentation is just the biggest toxins that we can think of to reduce exposure for now. But I know that there's been some questions coming through here, so I did want to address those. And I just also wanted to give another little plug for the lecture next month. It's going to be on men's health, and that's going to be given by Marie Morandi. So there'll be another lecture next month. And I'm going to start looking at some of these chat questions here. Okay, so one of the questions that I see is about wild caught fish. Does wild caught fish have any less PFAS than the farm fish? And then does boiling tap water have any benefit? That's a really good question. So to address the fish first, yes, so the wild caught can have less because they're not exposed to those water systems that are condensed in the farming aspect of things. There's pros and cons to both farmed fish and then also wild caught fish. What I think about more with the fresh versus farmed is I think about the mercury exposure. So actually farmed fish are going to have less mercury than the wild caught fish because of their ecosystem and what they're feeding off of. But keep in mind that usually, even though the farmed fish have less mercury, they're actually going to have a slightly less good fatty acid profile because they're eating more of like corn meal and certain things that they're feeding them in the farms. But at the same time, but at the same time, getting the wild might reduce your exposure to some of these things. But either way, there's no way to really tell unless you're actually doing like a lab test on those fish. So we want to eat fish. Fish is very good for us. So I wouldn't worry all too much about the fish. I would focus more on filtering your water, reducing the way that you heat your food in plastic. Those are going to be your main, biggest bang for your buck kind of changes. But it's a good thing about the fish too. There are some companies that will actually test more for the amount of plastic in these fish and the mercury exposure. And the names escape me right now, but I think it's maybe it's Safe Catch or something like that. But if you Google it, there are certain brands that are more expensive that will actually test for these things. So if you wanted to make sure it was out of your fish, that's what I would do. Is there benefit to boiling the tap water? That's strictly for bacteria. It actually doesn't reduce the PFA content, so it's not something that we can boil out. Again, these are forever chemicals, so they're not going to leave from that. It doesn't break it down further, so that's something to keep in mind. So the filters are really important there. One of the questions: can you recommend a non-toxic and non-stick type of cookware? So yes, the green pan that we talked about earlier is a good one. Caraway is a really popular one. Our Place is one. So again, really looking at what the pans are made out of is going to be a lot of the footwork that you've got to do on this. So, and it's not always obvious. You really got to look into what the pan is actually made out of to make sure it's the non-toxic. But in general, those main brands that are marketed more as a non-toxic pan are going to be the green pan and Caraway. Those are the big ones. Other people are interested in this non-toxic, non-stick cookware. Yep, and then someone pointed out it could be stainless steel as an option. Absolutely. We also talked about the cast iron. And someone asked a good question. How do we avoid drinking water? What way do we use safe drinking water? Filter. And we don't want to avoid water in general. We need water. We need to be hydrated. We're already exposed to this stuff, but it's just minimizing the exposure. So the filtering water is great. And then you kind of just take your chances if you're out and about or have to grab a water bottle or eat from a restaurant or something. Okay, so someone says that the community where they live uses reverse osmosis to treat water, and they're asking if that reduces the exposure to these things. And yes, as we saw in the presentation, reverse osmosis and that activated carbon filter are going to be really great ways to reduce the amount of these plastics and toxins in the water. So great, love that they use reverse osmosis. That's excellent. Okay, and then someone asked if the water bottle has BPA free on it, is it good and safe? Which I mean, it's not that it's the water bottle itself might be free of BPA's, but the water in it might not be. So that's the tough part, is that a lot of these the water isn't regulated the same way that our food is, and so it could just be tap water that you're getting in these water bottles. It doesn't always mean that it's gone through a filtration system. So really, the only way to know for sure is if you filter it yourself, or if you know the filtration source that it came from. I'm sure there's specific water brands that do use reverse osmosis or certain filters. So that'll be a good thing to look into after this for sure. What is the best type of water filtration system? It is very confusing. I agree. It is so confusing. Reverse osmosis, activated carbon filters, and there's a bunch of like pitcher options that we talked about as well. A little bit more questions about the fish. We talked about benefits to farm raised and wild caught. Ooh, is it safe to use paper plates to heat things up in the microwave? Is that bad? Depends on what your paper plate's made out of. Some of the paper plates have that plastic film on it, right? Some of them are a little like resistant or have have a little bit more durability to them. So if you wanted to go as far as to look at what the paper plates are actually made out of, if it's 100% paper, you're good to go. If it has some plastics on it, then you might be leaching a little bit into there. The only way to know to be safe is really by using glass or a safe ceramic to heat things up. Yeah. I know the microwave is so easy way to heat things up, but we've got to think about all the little details. Okay, what is ceramic made of that makes it safe for cooking? Ooh, that's such a good question. I did not go into the details of the ceramic, but I know that there are food grade ceramics and there's not food grade ceramics. So typically when something's marketed as the non-toxic, non-stick, it's going to be a food grade ceramic that's safe. But I don't know the exact minerals and compounds that are in it. That is a good thing for us to investigate after this for sure. Someone found this very informative. Excellent. There will be a recording afterwards that you can get a copy of along with the slides. Absolutely. And do cartons, for example, milk cartons, contain any concerning chemicals? Such a good question. I did not look into the details of this, but what I do know is that typically the outside could still have some of the plastics on there, but in the paper cartons, usually the inside doesn't have all the plastics, but you never know. It's definitely something that we could try to do some label reading to figure out. That's a really good point. Is silicone bakeware okay? Food grade silicone is okay. Heating it up is still not great. So if you really wanted to like completely minimize your risk, wooden utensils would be a safer option. Wood and bamboo are going to be a safer option. But silicone in general is better than like the black, like non-stick kind of cookware. Those ones tend to have some of those chemicals in there. How do you keep a wood cutting board clean? Great question. I'm still learning this first-handedly. And you rinse with some soap and water and then oil. Oiling the board is actually a really great way to keep it hydrated. And if you put like a really small oil wipe, just with some paper towel, if you put a little bit of oil on the cutting board before cooking, it'll actually kind of act as its own little like resistance for any colors. So like if you were cutting like sweet potatoes or beets or something on a cutting board, it's going to help it from absorbing all that color, which is nice because we don't want the things to be stained. But usually soap and water gets it right out, and then a little bit of oil helps keep it a little resistant naturally and safely. Someone asked about the cooking with the silicone again. That's a great question. Yes, and I did mention the silicone wraps for the food itself. So the silicone itself isn't going to leach into the food unless it's heated. So that's why it's good for the food storage, because it's not plastic that's going to leach into the food. But if you were to heat in silicone, then we could have some issues. But otherwise, for storage, they're a nice option. Very good. More comments. Love it. Someone's asking about toxic levels of lead have also been found in stainless steel bottles. You are absolutely correct. And yeah, it just leads back to the answer that we can't possibly minimize every single risk that we have. We are going to get exposed to some of these things, or a lot of these things still. This is really just a minimizing of the risk. And we also haven't seen people have the lead accumulation like we have seen some of these plastics start to accumulate in the body. So I would opt for the stainless steel personally, but it is a very good point. Air fryers are all the rage. Is that bad? Such a good question. It depends on what the air fryer is made out of, which I have not done the research into. So that would be another one for us to look into after this. There's probably, this is just an assumption, there's probably a wide range of materials that are used based on, price points. I'm sure there's cheaper air fryers, there's more expensive air fryers, and they're probably made with different materials. So it would be about looking into the materials that are used. Something that I will say is companies are a little bit more conscious of this chemical exposure, and if they're intentionally excluding certain toxic chemicals, they're going to make it known because it's a really good marketing tool for them, and they can also price it a little bit better with reduced, with marketing that it's not made with toxic chemicals. So just know that brands, if to save yourself from all the label reading, usually if they are non-toxic, they're good, they're going to say that. So it's something to look into for sure. Someone else asking about the air fryer. Should water be filtered throughout the home, or is drinking water enough? Such a good question. So if we think about it, any water that we're consuming, ideally, we would filter. The majority of water that you're consuming is mostly going to be the water that we're using to cook with, or the water that we're drinking. So, if you can filter water throughout the home with a filtration system, that's amazing. But the most important thing is to just filter that water that we're drinking and consuming. So the tap water, and our pitchered waters. Do we naturally eliminate microplastics, the substances that you specifically mentioned? So a lot of the research is looking at this. Again, there's more and more studies and even articles that you'll find that show, we consume X amount of plastic and over our lifetime, and they're finding this amount of plastic stored in the human brain and all of these things. So yeah, the answer is I don't think our bodies have evolutionally figured out how to eliminate plastics yet from our body. A lot of them are, again, forever chemicals. They're not going to break down. If we think about the way that our body naturally gets rid of toxins, the liver, the kidneys are huge organs that are going to help with us doing these things, and ways that we can support also just excreting heavy metals and other toxins would be through sweat. So sweat every day if you can. That's why sauna is super popular, but exercise in South Florida, if you go outside, you'll start sweating. So sweat every day to help, your body naturally detoxify these things. Keep your liver and your kidneys healthy. Drink plenty of water, filtered water, with the note of this presentation. But yeah, being hydrated is really important. And then honestly, also having a healthy bowel movement every day. Bowel movements are ways that we can excrete toxins from our body. Having a healthy bowel movement every day is a very good thing to do. Okay. Another person asked, all the fruit juices in the supermarkets are sold in plastic bottles. Do you know of any alternatives? Again, not all plastic bottles are going to be a problem. We could look either at the little recycle number at the bottom to see, what the plastics in it are. A lot of things are trying to be BPA free, but yeah, switching to the cartons might be an option to reduce the exposure. Someone else, PFAS don't break down naturally. That's why they're called forever chemicals. You're absolutely correct. Yes, someone asked, are ceramic plates okay to microwave on? As long as they're food grade safe, they should be fine and they should be a good option. Someone listed a reverse osmosis filter in here. That's awesome. Someone asked, is parchment paper safe to cook on? Ooh, yes, that's a very good question. There's different types of parchment paper available, so we would have to, again, do some label reading on that one. It is nice to use parchment paper sometimes versus aluminum. If we're cooking on aluminum all the time, we're gonna, get more aluminum in our body and accumulate it. So it's good to switch it up. But yeah, I would look at the parchment paper and see if it's mentioning any ingredients on there that sound like plastics or have any of the BPAs or PFAs on them. But yeah, another investigative thing that we should be doing. Okay, everyone's looking forward to the recording, and Jan will get that to the right people as needed. Oh, when someone goes to their doctor to request a blood, how can someone go to the doctor to request a blood test for these chemicals? So that kind of test is not something that a general practitioner or a medical doctor is likely going to do. That's a more maybe more integrative or like other pay out of pocket kind of test that people might choose to do. And I'm not suggesting that we necessarily should do that. It's just some people are interested in seeing their exposure to things. And really, if you start to minimize or swap out some of these things in your household, you will naturally be exposed to less. So you could do it, prophylactically. You could just start swapping things out now and know that you're reducing your exposure. Or if you are interested, it would be something that would be kind of an extra, like, pay out of pocket option. Okay, more talks about plastic containers. Some people are asking about the Brita. I don't know what the Brita filter is. We could look at the NSF numbers on it and see what it's all filtering out. Just as kind of a thing to note, though, some of the filters, especially if they're cheaper, they might just be filtering out that chlorine or that kind of, they might just be filtering out for taste. We want to make sure it's filtering out a higher level of things like all of those plastics and heavy metals, and it's good to look for reverse osmosis, activated carbon filter, and then ones that have those NSF certifications on there. Just trying to get the rest of these questions if I missed anything. Someone said most paper products will use a wax as their sealant or protection. That's generally safe and ubiquitous for off-the-shelf products like cups. Yeah, so if it's like a wax versus and maybe that's what's on the parchment paper, we're not sure. But that's a good thing to note, Kevin. So thank you for mentioning that. And I think I had another question that I might have missed on here. This is an interesting question. If someone has a high level of these chemicals in their body, is there a treatment to reduce, like dialysis or donating blood? Yeah, we're not really sure yet. I would just revert back to the body's natural way of detoxifying until we find out more from science. Okay. And then best products for baking, same as the pots and pans mentioned. So yes, all of the pots and pans, the brands that were mentioned, also have baking baking pans and baking sheets as well. Those ones, as long as you're putting something down on top of it, like a safe parchment paper or like aluminum or something, then you're getting less exposure to that directly. But yeah, you can absolutely get the baking pan versions of those as well. And the thing is that this is like a lot more of a trendy topic, and people are always trying to meet the consumers' needs. And so as the consumers continue to ask for non-toxic products, more and more of these non-toxic brands come out. So I remember when it was kind of just Caraway was like the biggest one, and now we're seeing so many other options pop up. So even if you just do a quick Google search, I'm sure you'll find some other ones that are even, other options to brands that beyond the green pan and all that. Okay. And then I know we're getting really close to our time limit here. So I think with that, a lot of these questions now are just for recording and making sure that people get the recording sent to their email. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up and just say thank you, everyone, for listening and the interest in this. I love that this topic was so well received, and I'm happy that everyone wants to learn more about it.
Well, Katie, I think that this is a standing ovation from everyone. This was really amazing, and the accolades are continuing to come in. I mean, I think we can all appreciate how much research Katie has done on this, and how knowledgeable you are, because you're able to answer these questions, boom, 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 aside from your presentation. So this is really quite amazing. And as we saw from the attendance, something that obviously we all need to be aware of. And thank you for that, bringing the awareness to us and the amazing information. And I have a feeling we might need a part 2 on this. But so thank you. This was amazing. And to everyone, especially those of you, as you now know, this was recorded, and it'll take a few days for Gary to do the editing. And in the meantime, Lee will be sending out a survey to you. So please complete the survey. And at that time, you can ask for a copy. I tried to write down some of the names that are requesting it. But as everyone knows, once the Zoom shuts down, we don't have the little chat box anymore. So please let us know when Lee sends you this survey if you would like a copy of this presentation. And it kind of looks like it's pretty much everyone. And the great thing about this is it's a good review for all of us, but also you'll be able to share it with family, friends, and just so many people need this information. So this was really quite incredible. And thank you, Katie, for all the time and research and effort you put into this. And someone did mention what a good communicator Katie is. So not only the education, but you're able to present it to us in a way that we can really understand, which is great. And so we're going to have one more lecture in August, and that'll be on August 27th, and that will be presented from our survivorship series, and it will be called Exercise for Cancer Survivors, presented by Becky Kalmus, who is exercise physiologist from our Drummond Therapy Centers. So if any of you are cancer survivors, we invite you to please join us on that presentation. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and let's go home and purge our kitchens. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, bamboo.